Trust the Profits Breeders' Cup coverage is brought to you by PlayUp Racebook, the most horse player-friendly racebook in the industry. PlayUp Racebook is always your best bet.
He's the winningest trainer in North America. Let's do a barn tour of the horses Steve Asmussen is bringing to the Breeders' Cup. Salutations and welcome, friends. I am your host for another episode of Countdown to Keeneland. My name is Matthew Desantis, and you can find me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. This episode of Countdown to Keeneland is going to continue our Born Tour for the Breeders' Cup. Barn Tour. I'm developing some sort of an accent suddenly, or affectation of regional dialect. But the Barn Tour that is going to continue here is about Steve Asmussen's fleet of horses that he is going to be bringing. Obviously, we've already done a barn tour episode on Charlie Appleby, on Brad Cox, as well as Bob Baffert. So if you're interested in getting any of those, make sure to go and check out the Trust the Profits YouTube page where you can find all of that. You can also find a ton of other great coverage. Make sure to like and subscribe to Trust the Profits on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at @FailedToMenace. That's how you're going to be guaranteed to get all of the great Breeders' Cup content that we have coming at you for the next week and a half until the big day. It's really coming down to the deadlines. The pre-entries are coming out on Wednesday. The PPs are going to be out on Monday. It's going to be really, really exciting. We're going to have a ton of content here for you on Trust the Profits. Now, before we get to the barn tour, I just want to give a big thank you to our sponsor, PlayUp Racebook. And just a reminder to all of you listeners to go and sign up and deposit at PlayUp Racebook and receive a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. Additionally, they're running a special on the Breeders' Cup. If you deposit in bonus $100 or more before the Breeders' Cup, they will give you an additional $25 free wager. Can't beat that. That's a great deal. So definitely go to check out PlayUp Racebook. A lot of good folks there. And again, thank you so much to them for supporting Trust the Profits. But like I said, today is about Steve Asmussen and his barn tour. And he's the winningest trainer in North American history. Obviously, he's approaching the 10,000 career victory platform. But what has been amazing to me in diving into the numbers for Steve Asmussen in the Breeders' Cup is looking at the recent success that Asmussen has had at the Breeders' Cup. You would expect a trainer like Asmussen to have hundreds of starters over his career at the Breeders' Cup, and that's not the case. Yesterday, we had Bob Baffert on the barn tour, and he had 100 starters since 2000. Asmussen only 60. So actually, pretty significant percentage less than that, obviously. And if you really dive deep inside the numbers, about a third of his starters that he has entered at the Breeders' Cup have come in the last 3 years. You realize when you start digging into the history of Steve Asmussen at the Breeders' Cup, why he holds such a special place for Gunrunner. Gunrunner changed Steve Asmussen's trajectory from a Breeders' Cup standpoint. Steve Asmussen was a trainer that would enter a few horses at the Breeders' Cup, may not even enter any horses at the Breeders' Cup certain years. Once Gunrunner won that classic, suddenly Asmussen has been entering 4, 5, 6, 7 horses in the Breeders' Cup since then. So it is not a stretch to say that Gunrunner really did change, certainly the trajectory of the types of races Asmussen was entering his horses in this time of year. So when he's somebody who gets very emotional when he talks about Gunrunner. Obviously, that horse has been an amazing progeny. We just saw he covered up something like 252 foals, 252 mares for next year. And so, there's going to be a ton of Gunrunner foals. I know there's people, and I'm one of them, it's probably not the best thing from a breeding standpoint, actually, and for the long-term health of the sport, but there is no doubt that he was an incredibly impactful horse and impacted Asmussen's barn as well. But he's got a great group that's coming in this year, but let's take a deep dive into Asmussen's barn tour. So his overall Breeders' Cup record, like I said, 60 starters, 8 wins, 8 seconds, and 2/3. A lot of this success has been more recent, although obviously going back to Curlin winning the Classic in 2007, but it obviously Echo Zulu being the champion juvenile filly last year in 2021, Matoli in 2019, the aforementioned Gunrunner winning the Classic in 2017, and then Untappable in 2014. Just a few of those really classic winners. Asmussen, much like Baffert, is winning at about a 14-15% clip, basically, in Breeders' Cup races. Does a nice job at also finishing underneath. So you're looking at about 30-35% in the money. So, like I said, very reliable trainer in this regard. Has a really good group this year, I think, that is particularly deep and is across a lot of different divisions, all of which are on the dirt. So let's take a look at that group of 8 horses that he is potentially bringing to the Breeders' Cup. I say potentially because there are 2 horses that I have on this list that are still a little bit of question marks, and we probably won't even get a full understanding of this until Monday before the Breeders' Cup. Even when the pre-entries come out, there's a good chance that a horse like Gunite and Wicked Halo will be listed in the pre-entries. There is still some debate about whether or not those 2 will run. Asmussen has not yet entirely confirmed that, and the reason for that is those 2 have just run just a couple of weeks ago, obviously just about a week ago, actually. And they'll be coming to the Breeders' Cup on about 2 weeks rest. So now they're both registered for sprint races, and we'll talk about those in a second. You can obviously wheel horses back in sprints a little bit more quickly than you can longer races, but and both of those were very impressive victories for those 2. So it didn't seem as if it took much out of them, but you never know until you get them back to the barn and check them out. But let's start with the headliner of this particular group. And, Steve's got so many great horses. It's hard to say there is one headliner, but we'll start with the Classic. And certainly Epicenter, who's we last saw winning the Travers, getting Asmussen that Travers victory, the grade 1 up at Saratoga. And really establishing himself as the best 3-year-old in the country. This is a horse that seemed to just come up short at the Breeders' Cup or at the Triple Crown races, obviously losing just so desperately close to Rich Strike, losing once again to early voting in the Preakness, but really went up to Saratoga and had just a great summer, the Jim Dandy, then the Travers. We've not seen him since then. Obviously, Epicenter has been down, though, training in Keeneland for the last couple of months now, actually, and is a horse that we talked about it yesterday with Taba. Epicenter is a horse that should sit a perfect trip. I said it yesterday on the Bob Baffert Barn Tour. As much as I love Life is Good as a horse, and I do, and I've been very bullish on Life is Good throughout most of his campaign. I've always, last year at the Pegasus, or earlier this year, I guess, at the Pegasus, I was very much so Team Life is Good over Team Knicks Go. I've been very bullish on Life is Good in every race he's run for the most part. I think 10 furlongs is a distance too far. I think if he's going to challenge Flightline, it's probably not going to work out well for him. And so as a result, if you think you're going to be fading Flightline, I think the 2 3-year-olds to look out for are Epicenter and Taba. Those are the 2, I think, most likely beneficiaries of a very fast pace up front. They can sit. They prefer that kind of stalking off mid-pack trip. Epicenter has demonstrated the ability to really overcome a lot of questionable or bad trips, making up a ton of ground at sometimes, sitting last at other times. Rosario at the Jim Dandy in that 4-horse field just kind of sat last, and everybody was wondering what was going on. And then he kind of made everybody look foolish for questioning him, though Joel Rosario does give rides that people like to question pretty regularly. But nonetheless, Epicenter is going to be a serious threat there in the Classic. Then you move to the distaff. He's got two of my favorite fillies and mares. He's got Society and Clairiere. I love these 2 horses. Society is, of course, a gun runner progeny herself. Last time out, won the grade 1 Cotillion and won it in just incredibly impressive fashion. Florent Drew, I thought, gave a beautiful ride that day, used that horse's natural speed to its advantage. It was a track that was playing very fast. Early speed was kind of a cheat code there at Parks that day. took advantage of it, and Society gets that grade 1 win. And this is a very lightly raced horse. When we dive a little deeper into her background, this is a horse that's still getting better, still improving. Really, really good. Clairiere is one of my favorites. Obviously, last time out was disappointing, 5th in the personal ensign. Although it turns out scraped the tongue in the starting gate. There's a little bit of an excuse there. It seems like Clairiere has come back very strong. And prior to that was getting the better of her biggest competitor, Malafat, in the older division. So again, Clairiere, I think a very serious contender in the distaff. Then some people might consider the headliners, Jackie's Warrior, of course, going to the sprint. Last time out was again up at Saratoga, second in that forego, where he got run down by Cody's Wish. The good news for Jackie's Warrior is that this is 6 furlongs. I think that's a good distance for this horse. We can talk a little bit more about whether or not Jackie's Warrior has been appropriately tested leading up to the Breeders' Cup. I think there's some legitimate questions about that. But Jackie's Warrior, a world-class sprinter and just an amazing, amazing horse. And this will be, if I'm not mistaken, the final race of Jackie's Warrior's career. Then you have the aforementioned Gunite. Gunite's become a horse I love. I like this horse as a 2-year-old a lot and has become a really nice 3-year-old. Won in impressive fashion in the Perryville Stakes at Keeneland last time out, which was just last Saturday, which is a listed stakes race, won with ease. This is a horse that's been racking up wins and keeping very good company in that sprint division as well. That 3-year-old sprint division's nice. They have some really nice 3-year-old sprinters. So even though Jackie's Warrior might be moving on, there's some really nice horses coming up through the ranks. Obviously, Jack Christopher being one of those that's going to, I think, do a lot of great running here for them. Then you go to the filly and mare sprint. He's got 2 in Echo Zulu, another gun runner. Gunite, I should mention, is a gun runner. Echo Zulu is a gun runner. Wicked Halo is a gun runner. Society is a gun runner. So quite literally half of Asmussen's contingent that he is bringing to the Breeders' Cup are gun runners. But Echo Zulu and Wicked Halo both entered in that filly and mare sprint. In all likelihood, Echo Zulu certainly will be headed there. Last time out was first at the Dogwood Stakes, which was a grade 3. And that was her first effort since that Kentucky Oaks, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we do a deep dive into her. Wicked Halo, of course, ran in that Ravens Run. Very similar trajectory to Gunite, a very well-raced horse that, keeps constant company and is always on the track, it seems, but just ran, like I said, last Saturday in that Ravens Run. So coming back on short rest, we'll see whether or not Wicked Halo actually ends up making the field for the filly and mare sprint, but certainly eligible based upon the wins that she's been racking up this year. And then finally, there's one Juvenile Golfport. This is a horse that I think a lot of people have pretty strong opinions about. And we can talk about that horse in the juvenile field and where Golfport exactly stacks up in that juvenile field. This is a horse that's been the favorite the last 3 times out and has not won. So this is a horse that, as people would like to say, burns some money. There's talent there. Maybe there's some excuses you could make, but this is a horse that does seem to not like to run past other horses at the end. And that might be a potential concern when you start stepping up in competition. So with that being said, let's start diving into each of these individual horses. And as I mentioned here, Epicenter, going to the Classic. Listen, if you want to hear people talk about Epicenter, go listen to Colin Sheehan on Trust the Prophets. He is the biggest Epicenter fan there is. He has been stumping for this horse since day one. This was his Derby pick. This was his horse. And credit to Colin, he was on Epicenter early as it being a very, very special horse. And Epicenter has been a very special horse. This is a horse that just runs honest every single time out. Throughout his career with you, if you throw out that first maiden attempt, every other race in his career is a first or second place effort. Obviously, winning that grade 1 last time out, getting that elusive grade 1, had racked up several grade 2s at both the Jim Dandy, at the Louisiana Derby, at the Risen Star, but then finally getting that grade 1 at the Travers last time out and winning it in style, winning by 4 or 5 lengths, if I'm not saying maybe 5, 6 lengths actually, over Cyberknife, Zandon, and Ridge Strike, who all kind of came in second, third, fourth very closely. So Epicenter just has been that dominant horse as a 3-year-old. Taba has run in different races in a lot of cases. Obviously, they both ran in the Derby, and Epicenter certainly got the best of Taba that day, finishing second in that Kentucky Derby. So we'll see. Taba is a horse that I think has matured a lot since that Derby effort, but so has Epicenter as well. And Epicenter seems to have reached another gear last time out, being able to reach some of those higher buyer speed figures. There was some concern maybe this horse would plateau at a certain point, but it seemed as if he continues to get better. Coming off a pretty long layoff, last ran in late August, so he's going to have 2+ months before the Breeders' Cup. So we'll see. But ASMUSSEN, very good at keeping horses fresh. And as I mentioned earlier, Epicenter should sit a very good trip if you expect Life is Good to press the pace. That's going to be the biggest issue. If Life is Good goes out and runs the way he did at the Woodward and runs a 24:48 opening quarter and half, then we might as well just get ready to give Epicenter all the cash money and all the awards, because somebody's going to have to put pressure on Flightline, I should say, to beat that horse. And if Life is Good gets strangled around the track the way that Irad was the last time out, and I understand they wanted to keep him calm, I get it, but they kept him so calm that Law Professor almost passed him. So, as much as I love Law Professor, that's not a great sign. And so that's the big if. Life is Good. Will he pressure him? If he does, then a horse like Epicenter, I think, sits a real chance and should be your second favorite or co-second favorite with Taba. Will probably end up being close to a co-third favorite in the Classic. I think Life is Good is going to take a lot of money. So I think Flightline's your favorite. I think Life is Good will probably be second favorite. And then I think Epicenter and Taba are going to be right there, kind of 3-4, but kind of co-third choices in this race. But Epicenter is a horse that just has really not done much wrong. And even in some of the toughest races has shown incredible grit and resilience as a horse that's been through the ringer, has tasted defeat, come back and won. I definitely like horses like that in general. And so definitely a horse I'm rooting for this year. Then we move to a horse maybe on the other end of the spectrum a little bit in Society. This is a horse 5 wins and in 6 career efforts. The only time this horse did not win was in that Coaching Club American Oaks against Nest, against Secret Oath, against Nostalgic, against some better older horses, or some other, some other 3-year-olds, but against some other kind of higher level competition. Here's what I like about Society. 1, the pedigree is fantastic. 2, look what she's done since coming back from that race. Cuts back to 7 furlongs and goes to Charlestown, which, by the way, 7 furlongs at Chucktown is a 2-turn race. Goes and wins that race with ease, okay? And beats a horse like Midnight Stroll. Midnight Stroll actually came back and ran pretty well at a graded stakes race this past weekend at Keeneland. And so Society comes back and follows up that Charlestown race with winning the Cotillion. Now, who does Society beat in that Cotillion? Beats Secret Oath. What did Secret Oath do 2 races earlier? Beat Society. So kind of avenges a loss to some extent over a horse like Secret Oath. Now, you could say Secret Oath is a horse that's starting to look tired. I would agree with that statement. That's a horse that has been through in a very aggressive campaign as a 3-year-old, run against the boys twice. Does seem like Secret Oath might not have quite the kick and burst that she did back in March and April on the Derby Trail. But nonetheless, Society was so impressive in that Cotillion. Like I said, Florent Giroux just gave a great ride. Let that horse go out, used incredible natural early speed. Now, here's the problem. There's potentially a lot of speed in the distaff. We'll have to see once PPs are drawn, and we'll have to see, obviously, where horses draw in terms of the post positionings, in terms of horses that might be forced to go on the inside, horses that can maybe judge where the pace is going to be sitting on the outside, etc. Obviously, last year, we remember that distaff had an absolutely nuclear pace that melted down. Marche Lorraine ends up winning. But Society, if she can avoid being sucked up into too much of a pace, this is a horse that does have great natural gait speed, great natural talent, can break to the front and just go. This feels like a horse, it might be a little bit of a wise guy horse, feels like a horse that's being looked over by some because of the Nest, Malathat, Clairiere, potentially the Latruska, kind of dynamic in this race. Society is a horse that does feel like a very solid secondary choice behind those. If you think any of those might falter, then I think Society is a horse that I think a lot of people are very bullish on. Again, pace will make this race, but Society is a horse that has shown the ability, again, to bounce back from defeat, which is always something I like. And is such a lightly raced horse. I mean, look, stepped up into that grade one, had never run a graded stakes race before that Coaching Club American Oaks. That the previous Monomoy Girl Overnight was a listed stakes race, goes up to a graded stakes race, then captures a grade three, then captures a grade one after that. So this is a grade one winning horse in her own right. And I really like her in the distaff quite a bit. However, my pick probably, and we're not getting to picks yet, but my pick probably in the distaff is going to be Clairiere. This is a horse I absolutely loved as a 3-year-old. I loved even more earlier this year. The last effort out in the personal ensign was not great, but here's what Clairiere has done. She has run against the very best. She always runs against the best. She runs against Malathat. She's run against Lachuska. She's run against Search Results. She's run against the best in that division, and she's been getting the better of them most of the time. During this 4-year-old campaign, she has been running extraordinarily well, finishes second in the Apple Blossom, but then comes back, wins a grade one, wins a grade two, then has that gate issue. Like I said, scraped the tongue in the gate at the personal ensign, ends up running fifth that day. I think you could probably chalk that up to that effort, because if you look, otherwise, this horse, again, does not turn in bad efforts. This horse is always honest and would love a fast pace up front. As you remember last year at the Breeders' Cup Distaff, Marche Lorraine won, but Malathat and Clairiere were both closing very fast, finished about 3/4 of a length from the winner that day. So she was right there, not far off from winning that Breeders' Cup Distaff last year. If you see a similarly fast pace, Clairiere is a horse that's going to benefit. She's a deep closer, just like Malathat, who's her main rival. And we'll see how the pace sets up in this race. Obviously, Nest is a horse that is, exploded onto the scene as her 3-year-old year has progressed. A lot of people love Nest. There's been a lot of workout videos showing Nest and Malathat training together. Malathat clearly getting the best of that workout. We'll see whether or not the 3-year-old Nest can compete with some of the older distaff horses. But Clairiere just so impressive. And like I said, just so consistent time after time after time, and always gives an honest effort, always battles, always comes with that late kick. I just really like this horse. Asmussen loves this horse too. Asmussen was super bullish on this horse going into a 4-year-old campaign, said that she just keeps getting better, that a light switch seems to get turned on after winning that cotillion last year, actually. And she's really turned it on, because if you look, her problem was she kind of finished underneath a lot last year as a 3-year-old. And then all of a sudden she gets to that cotillion. She gets away from Malathat. She gets the win. And then what happens? She finishes a very close fourth in the Breeders' Cup, comes back, win, second, win. And then she, like I said, had those gate issues at the personal ensign. But I think Clairiere, very strong candidate in the distaff. Well, let's move to Jackie's Warrior. And listen, all you got to see is all the bolded type here on the screen. Jackie's Warrior is a warrior, and he is a great sprint horse. I think the issue that you have with Jackie's Warrior is a question of whether or not this horse had been properly prepared for a big challenge as he got in the Forego with Cody's Wish. Also speaks to distance limitations potentially. If you look, the 2022 campaign for Jackie's Warrior was a lot of glorified workouts. I mean, this horse was not getting pushed. This horse was not having to fully run 6.5, 6, even 7 furlongs in that Churchill Downs Stakes. This horse could really let off the gas a lot. And Joel Rosario, the jockey for Jackie's Warrior, very much so let off the gas in a lot of these races that Jackie's Warrior was getting geared down with a half furlong or a furlong to go in a lot of cases. I mean, particularly that Alfred G. Vanderbilt. I mean, that was he didn't move a muscle. He didn't do anything. I mean, that horse cantered home at best and was getting geared down. Then suddenly has to run 7 furlongs in the Forego and gets tracked down and passed by Cody's Wish. Now, is that a distance limitation? Maybe. Although Jackie's Warriors won at 7 furlongs before. Is it that Pipeline, who finished third that day, softened Jackie's Warrior up on the front end? A little bit of that too. Was it that Jackie's Warrior maybe had not been in a lot of these tough battles necessarily, testing his resolve to get there? Potentially that as well. Listen, the sprint is 6 furlongs. That absolutely plays into Jackie's Warrior's hands. He's going to go out. He's going to go out fast. Okay? Speed of the speed in these sprint races. Jack Christopher likes to sit. Cody's Wish is going to want to sit. There's some other horses that we're going to talk about probably would prefer sitting mid-pack sitting. A horse like Gunite, actually, who we're going to talk about in a second. So Jackie's Warrior may be early speed there. Early speed in a sprint is usually the way you want to go. And then it's just a question of how good some of these other horses are that are trying to track Jackie's Warrior down. I think Cody's Wish is better at 7 furlongs or a mile. I think Jack Christopher is probably better at 7 furlongs or a mile. Well, they're at 6 furlongs. So Jackie's Warrior, this feels like a race that Jackie's Warrior can win. Obviously, faded last year. Again, aggressive pace up front last year. You had Aloha West flying up late, Dr. Shivo following C. You had some really interesting horses in that race last year. I was super high on Aloha West. That was actually one of my better Breeders' Cup picks last year. I love that horse going into that race and hit the exact actually because I really like Dr. Shivel as well. But, Jackie's Warrior is one where I can understand why people would want to potentially fade this horse. I think there are some legitimate questions. The thing is, we'll see when the race, when the PPs come out. But the race shape might set up really nicely for Jackie's Warrior this year, and I think the distance sets up perfectly for Jackie's Warrior. So there's a lot to like there. This is a horse that's done, again, not a horse that's done a lot wrong in its career. So many wins in big spots. A great sprinter champion, and is obviously looking to retire on top. But let's look at one of the up-and-coming horses challenging Jackie's Warrior, and that is Gunite. Gunite is a 3-year-old who I really liked last year. I remember that Saratoga special, and then the Hopeful. I was all over Gunite Hopeful that day at 8-1, I believe, of the post-time odds. So that won me a little bit of money selfishly. But Gunite's a horse that, like I said, just I think has matured really, really well. And they very quickly realized this is a sprint horse. They tried for a mile at the Champagne, but then they cut this horse back. They gave it a nice long layoff. You look at this 2022 campaign, it's impressive. That first time out in 6 months is a second to Conager, who's a very good horse in his own right. Then comes back, wins a listed stakes race, wins a grade 2 at the Amsterdam, then goes and finishes, I thought, a very solid second to Jack Christopher and the Alfred and the H. Allen Jerkins, I should say. Then comes back and wins 2 straight listed stakes races. And like I said, has just demonstrated so much class in being able to win those races and kind of avenging Conager that race 2 out ago at 7 furlongs. Again, though, Gunite, a little bit like Cody's Wish, probably better at 7 furlongs, probably not a mile. Gunite's probably closer to that 6.5 furlong preference. Could run the mile if he wanted to, but I do think is probably better at 6 furlongs. But here's the thing. Gunite, much like Jack Christopher, much like Cody's Wish, is not going to press Jackie's Warrior early. Gunite's going to sit. Gunite sits mid-pack and makes a run. And so there's not a lot of front-end speed. Well, again, we'll see if Gunite even has entered in this race, ran just last weekend at the Perryville, but obviously had success over that surface at Keeneland. And so that's something Steve asked me, so certainly has to take seriously, but this is a really, really good horse. I'm excited to see Gunite run as a 4-year-old too. I love this horse. So let's take a look at another horse that I'm a huge fan of. And my dad, shout out to my dad, who is a huge horse racing fan, and obviously the one who introduced me to the sport at a very young age, taking Matthew to Penn National when he was 10 years old and allowing me to use my chore money on on betting on horses. He taught me how to read a racing form, and he placed $2 win bets for me throughout the day. And I remember I was so ecstatic that I won like $6, and I just bet like $2 on every favorite. Basically, I was a very chalky player even back then. I'm less chalky now, but a horse that I love, my dad, like I said, also loves Echo Zulu. And Echo Zulu, obviously the champion 2-year-old last year, winning that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, then getting a really long layoff, coming back, running that Fairgrounds Oaks, and not just getting the long layoff, just wasn't even on the work tab at all. So getting a really long layoff, winning that, beating Hidden Connection, then running into Kentucky Oaks that, I'll be honest, I rewatched that race. That is one hell of an effort that horse ran. Echo Zulu ran a hell of a 4th place race that day, was up on the lead. This is a horse that never relinquished the lead early, always was a front runner, all ones on the PPs straight across, but relinquished the lead early that day. But that was an incredibly fast pace. Not quite what they were doing at the Derby, but pretty damn close. That Oaks pace was very, very hot. And the fact that she dug in and stayed right there until the very end was, like I said, just so impressive to me. And obviously gets a well-deserved long layoff after that, then comes back in the Dogwood Stakes and beats a horse that I really love in that Tarabi. Tarabi's a horse I absolutely love. Beats Tarabi, wins that grade 3 Dogwood Stakes with ease. Now is going to the filly and mare sprint. I think, obviously 7 furlongs, 6 furlongs is kind of a perfect distance. Sprinting is more ideal for this horse. She can obviously do the 2 turns. She's demonstrated she's won going 2 turns, but I think, going that 1 turn sprint is probably better for her. One of the issues with Echo Zulu, she doesn't have great speed figures. I mean, that's kind of a fascinating thing about her is for a horse that's always on the front, that's always in the lead, she doesn't have overwhelming speed figures when you look at buyers, when you look at Timeform US. She doesn't blow you off the page, but yet she's always there. She's just got very good natural speed in the front end, and then she just digs in. I mean, she really demonstrated that ability in the Oaks. And so it'll be interesting to see whether or not horses that are maybe more naturally fast than her out of the gate, what that looks like for her, whether she can rate a little bit more effectively and then go. But Echo Zulu, a horse I absolutely love, but going into a tough spot in that filly and mare sprint. Some nice other horses in this race, including one from her barn and kind of a relative in Wicked Halo, a fellow gun runner. Wicked Halo is a horse that has matured very well. And obviously, you see, has been stepping up in class the last few times out, getting wins at 2 straight listed stakes races, then getting 2 straight grade 2 victories the last 2 times out. Now, Wicked Halo, is this a horse that is ready to step up to prime time? I don't know, but this horse does seem like she's peaking at the right time, really has matured beautifully as a 3-year-old. And I think, by all indications, has bounced back very well from that Ravens run, should be in a good spot here. It does feel like maybe this is more of an underneath horse for Steve, maybe not the strongest win candidate, but you'll get much better odds on Wicked Halo than you will on Echo Zulu. So if you want to take a little bit of a swing, I think obviously Wicked Halo is a horse to consider, and obviously likes the ground at Keeneland. Just really, like I said, blew out the field in that Ravens run. Very good effort. Over again, some nice horses. Midnight Stroll, who I mentioned earlier, finished 3rd in that race. So there's some good horses in that race that that Wicked Halo just kind of dispatched with. And again, I think is a very solid horse here, and one that another gun runner, so the progeny and the pedigree, is going to be very solid. Well, let's finish up with a horse that likes to burn money, and that is Golfport. What do we do with Golfport, people? The easy answer is you fade Golfport. But the thing is, Golfport now, you're probably going to get a really good price on. Golfport has all the talent in the world, impeccably bred, but this is a horse that, won first 2 times out, won impressively first 2 times out, stakes winner in that second race. Then goes and really just gets blown out by Damon's Mound in the Saratoga Special. Then comes back and loses to Forte in the Hopeful. Now, it was a good run, certainly from Golfport that day, but Forte wins pretty easily. Then comes back in the Champagne, which granted was in the slop, okay, was absolutely in the slop, but comes in 3rd to Blazing Sevens and Verifying. Now he's going to get back and, we'll see what the weather's like. So hopefully the weather's good, fast track, hopefully for Friday for those juvenile races. But it's hard to get a lot of excitement around Golfport when you have horses like National Treasure, like Cave Rock that Bob Baffert's bringing in, even the Brad Cox horse Verifying that I think, I saw a commenter say that he thinks Verifying might be better on the turf. That wouldn't surprise me, but Verifying still a very effective horse in the dirt as well. So, you have Blazing Sevens as well, who obviously beat this horse in the Champagne last time out. So the thing is, Golfport came out as a huge favorite in all 3 of those last races, and again, just did not deliver. So this is a horse that's been not meeting expectations. That said, ASMUSSEN runs these horses regularly. I mean, this will be a 6th race going into that juvenile. So this is, quite different from some of Bob Baffert's horses that are going into their 3rd race or maybe their 4th race, whereas Golfport will have raced now 6 times. This horse has some experience, has experience over off tracks, which, didn't necessarily respond great, but didn't run terribly in that Champagne. But the fact he didn't get past Verifying was a little problematic for me. I really Really would have liked to see him dig in and get past verifying for second that day. Again, probably just didn't like the conditions. That's understandable, but still, a horse that just seems to finish underneath a little bit more. Maybe reminds me of a little bit of a Midnight Bourbon. Whenever I see a lot of those seconds starting to rack up underneath finishes and big spots, whenever I start seeing that, always makes me think of one of my favorite horses, Midnight Bourbon, and the fact that I was always convinced the next race was the one that he was going to break through, and that was sadly never the case. But Golfport, like I said, very talented, but definitely some question marks to raise. But you're going to get a more honest price on this horse. I mean, that's if you still believe in Golfport, the good news is you're going to get an honest price on this horse because people are going to be attracted to Baffert horses. People are going to be attracted to Cox and Pletcher horses. The fact that Golfport is maybe coming in under the radar, maybe that helps a little bit in this spot. So this was one of our longer barn tours because Steve's bringing so many damn horses to the Breeders' Cup, but this is what happens when you bring 7. But thank you again for tuning in. Really appreciate it. We're going to keep doing these barn tours the rest of the week. We got Chad Brown coming up. We got Aiden O'Brien coming up. We got Todd Pletcher coming up. So those are the 3 we're going to do this week. Might drop another one on Saturday or Sunday. We'll just see it for time, but definitely wanted to hit the big barns. But I might do a special one about some of the Japanese horses, talking about some of the elements there, why we aren't hearing more buzz about Japan this year, get into some of the details there, talk about maybe some of the minor barns in just kind of one overall episode. People like a Todd Fincher, some of the other smaller trainers, Graham Motion perhaps, who only have maybe 2 or 3 horses that they're bringing, but still able to get them and do a deep dive there. But before we sign off today, just a quick reminder to sign up and deposit at PlayUp Racebook and receive a 50% deposit bonus for up to $250. Big thanks to PlayUp Racebook for supporting Trust the Profits. And as a little thank you to all the listeners, if you deposit $100 or more before the Breeders' Cup at PlayUp Racebook, they will give you an additional $25 free wager. Maybe you want to use it on some of the horses I just outlined here in the ASMUSSEN Barn Tour. But no matter what, we're going to keep plugging away with this. We're going to keep giving you all the great content. We got so much coming up. Picks and analysis, that goes without saying. We got fun fantasy drafts we're going to be doing. People like Sarah Bodwy, Chase Sessions, Wolf of Oaklawn, Caitlin Free are going to be on with me. We're going to do some fun stuff there. Colin's got a ton of stuff he's going to be doing with the daily doubles. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff. We're coming up on our 500th episode as well, so we're going to do something special for that. Always really great. So make sure to press that like button. Make sure to subscribe to Trust the Profits to get all of our great Breeders' Cup content. Until next time, friends, remember that it's now post time.
Trust the Profits Breeders' Cup coverage is brought to you by PlayUp Racebook, the most horse player friendly racebook in the industry. PlayUp Racebook is always your best bet.